Hey, and welcome to another Frontend Engineering Explained. It's been a little while if you've been following these one up to the other. So this was going to be a pretty short video where I was just going to have a look at using the filter function of arrays in JavaScript. And then I started tinkering and tinkering and tinkering. And so now it's going to be about how to use filter with arrays in JavaScript and a whole bunch of other things as well. So it started with that, and then it ended with this, which is a web component, but it's also maybe, you can call it maybe a little app that shows you all the named colors in CSS and then gives you a way to filter through them, copy it to your clipboard, and all kinds of stuff like that. Also different ways of filtering, either filtering as you type or filtering by typing in what you want and then pressing submit. And there's a whole lot of interesting things in here that I think would be nice to just walk through and have a look at. So I think the way to do this is I'll look at the HTML. There's not a heck of a lot there, to be honest, but there's some interesting things that's worth talking through. And then we'll have a look at the JavaScript, which is essentially a web component. And then we'll have a look at some of the interesting CSS parts that make up this whole thing. So I'll also show you some stuff that I've done with regards to accessibility and also show you that it works with mouse, but also keyboard. And the interesting thing is when we get to the screen reader part is I'm going to be using Chrome with VoiceOver because while traditionally the best pairing on macOS was always Safari with VoiceOver, I don't know if it's maybe a recent version of Mac or what's going on, but it seems to go a little haywire when I use Safari and VoiceOver. I don't know, there's timing things that gets out of hand, and it's just weird. I just get much, much better results when I use it with Chrome or even with Firefox. I get better results than with Safari. So I'll be using Chrome for the most part here, but I'll just quickly show you that this works exactly the same way in Safari and also in Firefox. So without talking about the broader things anymore, let's dive in. So let's start off with the HTML as mentioned. So first of all, nothing earth-shattering here. I'm only going to touch on the things that I think is a little interesting. Of course, I'll push all of this code to a repository on GitHub, and I'll link it in the description so you can go and have a look through all the code and let me know if you have any questions. So first things first is over here. If you don't know what this is a custom element. So basically, this is an element that I kind of made up myself called CSS color names. And we'll see in a moment how this then is connected to the JavaScript that then turns this into something that the browser knows what to do about. So if a browser doesn't understand these things, it's just going to ignore it, but then pretty much nothing will work. So we're relying on the fact that the browsers that we are targeting will understand custom elements and most of the other aspects of web components. So that's what this is. This is a custom element. And then inside of it, instead of using shadow DOM, I've opted to just use light DOM. So all that means is this is just your normal HTML that you would normally write. Nothing weird here. In a different video, I will touch on shadow DOM and what exactly that is and how it differs from what's now commonly called light DOM. So we have a form, which you saw, and then we have these. We have, for example, a field set that groups our two checkboxes together. And these we have, for the field set, we have a legend, but we're hiding it visually. But for screen reader users, it will announce that, basically how do you want to filter is what this whole field set is about. And then each of these, of course, filter as you type or filter on submit. These are your two options. Then we have our label for our input element here, our text input. We're going to type in our name of our color, and we've associated this using for an ID, but we're visually hiding the label. So then the next thing, but again, you'll hear the screen reader announces that. And then we have our button that is hidden by default, but if you choose to filter on submit, then we will remove the hidden attribute here and we will show it. And then the other interesting thing here is this little paragraph tag here. And you'll see there's this aria tag on here, aria live assertive. And basically that tells the screen reader that this is an area that content will change. And when it changes, it needs to interrupt the users, whatever the user's doing, and announce what is changed in here. So you'll see in here is where we're injecting this line here, showing, so it tells us how many colors of the total number of colors we are actually showing. And the reason this is here, even though there's nothing inside of it, is because this must be inside the DOM when the page is loaded. So this is why we're adding the empty key here with our aria live. Other than that, there's nothing really super interesting going on here. There's a footer with some text, and then we're just importing our JavaScript. So let's head over to our JavaScript. And this is just a CSS class, and it extends HTML element. That's part of what makes this a web component. So we're just extending the generic HTML element. But you will see here some lines of code here at the top. And there's a reason why I put that there. Because if we look here, you'll see there's a whole bunch of names here. And of course, those are the CSS color names. Now, I needed to get this from somewhere. So I got that from this page on MDN, named color, that contains all of them. And here it has two tables. Now, only after I kind of got quite a ways through, I realized that I could actually just have copied the stuff from the second table, and I would have probably had all the colors. But what I'll show you now is what I did initially. So I got all of this information from both tables, and that turned out to cause duplicates because a lot of, like you can see, here's aqua and here's aqua as well. But I decided to leave it like that because that actually opens up something else that I will show you in a second. You might have noticed that if you have a sharp eye, but you will dig into that at the moment. So the thing is, of course, I don't want to have to copy roughly 150 colors one by one. So I used a little bit of JavaScript in the browser console to do that. So what I basically did is this. So we have these two tables. Now, if we look in the DOM, you'll notice that it's both in this figure called table container, but other than that, there isn't anything that makes this specifically targetable. And the thing is, if I just target table with a query selector all, for example, I'll also get the table that's here under browser compatibility, and there might even be another one here that I'm just not seeing. So I cheated a little bit here and made it easier for myself by giving this a class called colors. And so I did it for both tables. So this one, and then add attribute, this one. Now inside the console, we do so color cells, and then we go document dot query selector, and we want all. And now, first of all, we want both those tables. Then we want to go into the T body, and then the row, and then TD first child, and then there's a code element. So the code element is what wraps this, like Alice blue, antique white, etc. So with that CSS selector, we now, if we do color cells, you can see here we have a node list of 165 code elements. And you can kind of see those blue lines, right? It's going across that. But now what we want is we don't want those elements, we want their text content. So now what we'll do is we'll do const colors equals, and then we want to do array.from, because we can't do what I'm about to do, calling a map, just directly on color cells, because that is a node list, and that's not available. That function isn't available in a node list, but we can take a node list and convert it into an array as easy as this. So array from, and we'll do color cells, and then dot map. And so for each loop, we'll get our color, and what we want to return is color.text content. And with that, if we do colors, oops, we can now see we have an array of 165 colors. So those are all those strings. And to grab them, I just right click and say copy object. And with that, you can see I have the whole object here in my clipboard. So that is how I got this. And I'll leave that code commented out at the top of the file, so you can also take a look at that. So that is how I got this whole big old array. Now, at the top here, I just have this static selectors object, and this is just a couple of CSS selectors that I'm going to use to get some of the elements that I know I'm going to need later on. And this is a pattern that we use often at Factorial, where I work currently, when we're writing web components, which we do all the time. And so this is part of a pattern that we use there a lot. We use this in conjunction with this function called getElements, but we'll get to that in a second. So here's the reason why I left those duplicates in. Because what are we going to do about this duplicate situation? Now, one thing you could do is you can use Array.filter, or you can go over an array, over this entire array, and you can, for each item, say, does this item, let's walk back a little bit. So you take this array and you're going to loop through it. And then we're going to have another array. And as we loop through this array with our duplicates in it, we're going to say, this current item, does it exist in this new array that we're creating? If it does, we skip over it. If it doesn't, we push it into it, right? So that way we'll get rid of all of that. But the thing is, we have this other object in JavaScript called the set. And one of the things about a set is that it cannot contain duplicates. So if you initialize a new set and you pass in your array with these duplicate strings in it, what you're going to get out is a new set with all the duplicates removed. So it's a quick way to basically have the JavaScript engine just do that for you. So what we get out of this at the end is a new set object. This is key because we actually don't want a set. So you can choose about the trade-offs here that you want to do. If you want to just throw your array in a set and use its side effect to get rid of the duplicates, or if you want to actually loop through the array and manually tease out all the duplicates. I chose to go this route. So now we have that stored in this private. So this hash here in front means this is a private property of this class. By the way, I'll make a separate video on another day where I'll talk about the fact that this is a private property for the class, but it's not private in the sense that you might think. So be careful. And this holds true for the private keyword in TypeScript as well. It's not as private as you might think. So, but I'll discuss that in another one. But if you were wondering, like, is this just a naming thing I'm using? This is actually JavaScript, and this is how you identify that this property is a private property to this class. So let's move on. So we have a couple of more of these private properties. Here we have a little piece of HTML, but it's a string. It uses the backticks. So a JavaScript template string or a string literal is what we're using here. And then we have this little kind of like placeholder here, mustache template-like thingy that we'll replace later. We'll see that in a second. And then we have this getElements function over here, as I mentioned earlier. And all it does is it returns an object with some properties, and each of these properties then refers to a specific element. And it's using that CSS color names, .selectors, and then the relevant CSS selector. And we're using this, which you might find interesting. And this just refers to our current class. And what that refers to in the HTML is our custom element. And I'll show you now why I say this. So when you say this.query selector, it's going to scope that selector to just what's in here. So make sure that when you do something like this.query selector, that the element you're looking for is actually contained within your custom element. Because, for example, if this, let's say, for example, this paragraph item was outside this, and you try to do this dot total count, it will not find it. It would be undefined. because it's outside of our custom element, and the this.querySelector is now scoped to just what's inside of our custom element. So I'll just quickly jump to the end of the file. So here right at the end we're doing custom elements.define, and here we are registering our custom element, and we're saying this is the tag name, and that tag name is associated with this class in JavaScript. So this class implements this tag. So that is what I mean, and that is how so it's scoped to this class. This class represents the tag that we're using inside HTML. So let's jump back there. Okay, and now here's our constructor. So this is just a common thing you will have with your classes. It's the very first thing that will call when you instantiate a class. It calls the constructor. We call super, which then calls the constructor of the HTML element that we are now extending here at the top. And as you can see here, we're just setting the value of this.elements. So in order to refer to, for example, this private property, you have to prefix it with this. If you just say elements, it will not work. And for example, if you do that, then ESLint will say private identifiers are only allowed in class bodies and may only be used as part of class member declaration. So we need to bring our this back, and the same thing goes with our functions. So this.getElements. Now we just have a property here that contains these, and you'll see how nice we can later on destructure what we need out of this. And then here, what we're doing is we're just taking that set, so sorted our CSS named color set, and we're changing it into an array, array.from, and we're changing into that, and we're sorting it. Because if you look at the top, you'll see here silver, gray, white, maroon, red, purple. So not sorted. Eventually it becomes sorted from aqua going down, but there's stuff here that's not sorted. And those are probably the duplicates as well. But still, I wanted to keep it like that so I can talk about this. And I'm using toSorted here as opposed to sort. The main reason you would do that is basically this doesn't do, so it doesn't affect the original array. We create a new copy. So that's basically what this does, is it takes the array on the left, so this one, and it returns a new array that's sorted, and that's then stored in this sorted unique color names. Now that we have sorted unique color names, we're also storing the length, so the total number, and of course that is what we'll use for this part of the string. Okay, then we call two functions. And I think let's think about the best way to go about this. Let's just step through it like this. So we call this function called list color names, and we're passing in all of our colors. So this is on page load. It's in our constructor. So it's the very first thing that's going to run. So in our constructor, we want to, at the first time, we want to list out all 148 of these colors. So let's look at how we're doing that. So first thing is we're destructuring the total count. So that is our paragraph element here. We're destructuring that. Oops. Let me just save here. We're destructuring that out of our elements object. And then we are checking if, we're getting our color names, and we'll see where that comes from now in a second. And we're assigning it to container. If it exists, we're going to remove it. That means it's not the first time we've called list color names. So we've already injected our unordered list with the class name color names. So in order to not just add another unordered list and another unordered list, we actually want to remove it and add a new one to it. So that's basically what we're doing. We're just checking, we're trying to query it from inside the custom element. If it exists, we remove it. Then we create a new unordered list element, set its class name. And now for each of those colors that was passed in here, which is our string array of colors, we're going to loop through all of them. And for each, we create a button element and we create a list item element. On our button, we're setting a data attribute called color that has the value of the current color that we're going through. So let's say Rebecca purple or Alice blue. And then Now we're going to use that string from above. So if we go up, let me just see, maybe I can just click on this. Yes. So now we're going to use this piece of HTML here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that as the inner HTML of our button element. And we're going to replace that color mustache templatey thing with the actual name of the color we're going through here. Now, generally, you don't want to use inner HTML. You want to be, well, let me rephrase that. You want to be careful when you use inner HTML. Now, in this case, I know where this is coming from, right? This is not user generated or anything. This is completely under my control. I know that it's coming from this private property. So I can feel confident that I'm not going to like put my users at risk here. So in this case, I feel okay with using inner HTML. And there's a reason why I chose to do it this way, because I want to add this whole string into the button. But the only thing I want to make visible is just the color name. But you will see when we do this with an actual keyboard and the screen reader on, we actually want the screen reader to tell the user not just the color name, but we want it to say copy color name to your clipboard, right? So it's more instructive to somebody who can't visually see that it's a button that they can click. To be honest, I should probably add some text to also tell it to other people. I will do that. Then for the button element, I add a class list or a class called copy color name, something we'll use later on. And then here's something interesting that I'm going to mention, and then we'll get back to it when we're at the CSS. So remember it, but I will refer back to this. So for each item, so for each list item, we're adding an inline style element, and all we're setting there is a custom property called color name, and we're setting its value to the current color that we're going through in our current loop. Then we're appending the button to our list item, and then we're appending our list item to our container, right? So we have our list item, we stick our button in there, we take our list item with our button, and we stick it into our UL. So, and then the next one under it, like that, right? And now, when we're done through all of this, we're going to, that total count that we destructured here at the top, so that paragraph, we're going to set this string into it, showing colors.length, so that is the number of colors that was passed in, of this.total colors count, which we calculated in the constructor, colors. So on first load, of course, what we're seeing is showing 148 of 148 colors. And as we will see, we're going to call this function quite a lot of times as work is being done in other places in the JavaScript. And so this string is going to change depending on the number of colors that we're working with. And then as a last thing, again, when we're referring to this, we're referring to our custom element, and we're saying to this custom element, append this container. So append our unordered list with all of our colors in there, right? So on our first load, we are then getting this. So we're seeing our heading here, we're seeing our form, and we're seeing all of our colors, and we're seeing our little footer there at the bottom. And so that is what is generated the very first time we load the page. So now if we go back up to our constructor, there we go. The next thing we're doing is we're adding event listeners. So again, we're using this nice little destructuring. So we're destructuring our color input. So that's the input where we're typing in. We're destructuring our colors form and our submit button. So those three elements, we're just grabbing them out of our this.elements, and they're now individual variables. And now to our colors input, we're adding an event listener for when somebody types into the input. And whenever you do, we call this.handle input change. And then also, should somebody press enter, or as you will see, depending on the selection you make at the top, if you click the filter button, we're handling the submit event of the form by calling handle submit. Now, before we dive into these, let's take a look at this one. So for this, we're using something called event delegation. So instead of adding two event listeners, one event listener to, let me just go to the browser here. So instead of adding an event listener to this radio element and another event listener to this radio element, we're instead adding an event listener to the whole custom element, right? And we're saying, okay, we're adding an event listener that listens for change events to the custom element. So we're going to allow anything inside this custom element to bubble up. So events bubble. And so when a change event happens inside somewhere in the custom element, so in this case, one of those radio buttons, for example, it's going to bubble up. And then as it's bubbling up, we're going to say if the event or target, so the thing that triggered this change event, if its value, and we're just making sure here that maybe for some reason in the HTML we decide to change the value here of submit to uppercase, or we make the first S in uppercase, then all of a sudden, if we didn't do the two lowercase part here, because we're using triple equals, it will not match. So just to be 100% sure, we're saying if that value, two lowercase, equals, submit, the string submit, then what we want to do is we want to actually remove the event listener. So the one we just added here, we want to remove that event listener because we don't actually want it to do we don't want it to handle input change as the user types. And we want to remove that hidden attribute so that the submit button is visible. Else, if the value was live, then we want to add back this handle input change event listener, and we want to hide the button. So now, if we go between these, you'll see now, filter, we have a button, and filter as I type, no button. And now if I type, you can see it's filtering down to Alice and like that. But when I have this and I type, nothing happens because I have to click on a filter in order for that to work, right? So now if I go on filter, again, it'll show everything. So that's how that part works. Now here is something interesting. So this is a tricky thing. So this keyword is very important, as you've noticed probably so far, especially within our class context that we're in, because this refers to our class. Now, when we, for example, do this part here, we say this.handle input change, we want this inside here to be bound to our class, because we're going to do stuff like this.debounce timeout. And here we're going to use this.elements. And if this doesn't refer to our class, we're going to get an error in JavaScript because it's going to tell us that we're trying to refer to something that's not inside this object, because this might point to the window object instead. Now, there's two ways you can do this. One way you can fix this, for example, is when you call a function or when you register an event handler like this, or in this case, we're removing it, so let's do it over here. You can say .bind this. Now you're explicitly telling JavaScript, when you call this function, I want you to bind the this keyword to the class. The problem is when you do it like this, I'm saying this a lot, I don't think there's a way to avoid it. When you do it like this, the fact that you're calling this bind, this at the end here, creates a new instance of this function. Now, when you try to remove an event listener, you need to provide the correct event you're listening for, but also you need to provide the event listener or the handler that it needs to remove. But it needs to be the same function instance. It can't be two different functions in memory. It needs to match. If they don't match, it's not going to remove it. So if you do it like this, using .bind this, it will not work when you try to remove it. Especially, you can even try .bind this, you're just going to make the problem worse. So how do you solve it? Well, there's different ways, but the way that I solve it is what we could have done here. You'll see I use an arrow function here. What you can also do is, for example, you can do this. Let me show you. So you can do that as well. That's also a private function. When you do it like this, however, you need to do the .bind this down here, or this is not going to refer to our class. So to avoid that, when you use an arrow function, our this keyword is going to be implicitly bound to our class. And by doing that, we do not have to use bind in our add event listener. And as such, we don't have to use, we're not going to use bind in our remove event listener, and it will work. So if you ever run into a situation where you're doing this, whatever function name it is, .bind, and you later on try to remove that same thing, and you're saying, but I'm referring to the same function. Why is it not being removed? Have a look at how you are defining the function that's your event handler. Are you doing it as just a function, a plain function, or as I showed you here, or are you using an arrow function? Because if you're not using an arrow function, just switching to an arrow function is probably going to solve your problem here. So that's something that can trip you up, and it tripped me up there for a moment until I realized, of course, this is not pointing, because it's a relatively cryptic error that you get. So be wary of that. All right, so let's move on. The next thing we're doing is, again, we're doing a, event delegation. Again, we're doing event delegation, and we're adding, this time, we're saying, hey, listen for click events. And when a click event happens, so this is with this here, we're listening to when you click on one of these little buttons over here, so one of our colors. So what we're saying there is, when a click happens, it's going to bubble up. When it reaches the custom element, handle it. And now, this is not a submit button or anything, so we don't have to prevent default or anything like that. But what we do want to check is, we're using this thing called matches. Now, you might have used something like, because basically, let me go a little further here. So you can see here we're using a CSS selector. Now, you might have used something like if event.target.classlist.contains, and then you would throw the CSS selector in there. What that does is it does a string match, right? So it's going to say, in this class equals blah, 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 in the DOM, does that string, that value there, does it contain the string that you just passed in? And if it does, it's going to return true. If it doesn't, it will return false. What matches does is it says, does it match this CSS selector? So this means you can actually do really nice, really cool things here that you can't do with classlist.contains. Classlist.contains is just a string match. It just says, is this string present in there? And in fact, if I tried to do event.target.classlist.contains and I passed in this, it would always return false, because this contains the dot, right? And in the DOM, of course, your class names don't have the dot. It only has the string after the dot. So for that to work, you would actually have to strip off the first character from this. When you use matches, you don't have to do that. So that's a nice little thing. Cool. So if we if it matched, then of course this will be true. But if it isn't, we just return, because this is not a click event we're interested in. So we just return. Don't do anything further. But if we did actually click on one of these little buttons, we want to do something about it. So very first thing is, if you remember earlier, we added a color data attribute to our button. So I can show you that if we inspect this little guy. So you can see data color, Alice blue. You will also see here that little custom property, style custom property, Alice blue, that I mentioned earlier. Remember that? We'll get back to that in a while. So we grab that off. So now we know what the color name is of the button we've clicked. And now again, we're using that string. So that string from earlier, we're using it again. And this time we're saying this blah, and we're replacing again our mustache template with our color name that we just read off our data set. Cool. And we're setting that again. We're storing this now in a variable, because we're going to change what the button says, and then we want to change it back. Then we're using the clipboard API. So back in the day, allowing somebody to copy something from a web page through JavaScript was kind of impossible. You had to use Flash. Now it's as simple as this. The one thing that, because there's a security concern here, you can just randomly write stuff to somebody's clipboard. this needs to be user initiated. So by the user clicking the button, the user is initiating this, and therefore we are being granted the right to write something into the user's clipboard. Because we're saying, hey, when you click this button, we want to write some stuff into your clipboard, and the user's clicking the button, therefore saying, I'm cool with that, go right ahead. And because of that, we can do navigator.clipboard.write text, and we're writing the name of the color. Now it's asynchronous, so therefore we had to put async over here, and then we can use await down here. Of course, you could have also not have done the async up here, and you could have used .then syntax, but you know, why not use async await? It's a much nicer syntactic sugar. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, cool, this is an asynchronous process, so wait for this to finish. And as soon as it's finished, we're changing the inner HTML of the button to say color name copied, and then we wait for 2 seconds, and 2 seconds later, we change the label of our button back to what it was originally. And that's why we want to again use that HTML, because we want to put the whole string back, but hide everything visually except the actual color name. So if we go into this now, and we click on, for example, aqua, it says aqua copied, and 2 seconds later it goes back. And if we actually look in our clipboard, there is the name. It's copied, right? So that's super nice, and it does that with all of them. I was thinking I should probably add a little classic clipboard icon in here, probably, so you can actually, so it's more obvious, because for screen reader users, this is very obvious that that's what it does. But right now, I'll be honest, it's not super obvious. I need to add that icon, but I should probably also add maybe a line of text somewhere here that says you can click on any of the colors to copy it to the clipboard, something like that. I'll think about that. That's a UX, UI design kind of question. So that is everything that happens in Add Event Listener, right? So that is how we're handling click events by event delegation. That's how we're handling change events through event delegation, and then checking if the element or the action that triggered the event is something we're interested in this specific instance. Now, let's first look at submit. So submit can happen at any point. Technically, it can even happen even if the user has selected filter as type, because nothing prevents you from pressing enter, right? There's no button to click, but nothing prevents you from pressing enter. Nothing will really happen when some JavaScript will execute, but nothing will really happen because you've already filtered, right? So it just won't do anything. But also, as you will notice, if we go to the actual function here, handle submit, critically, the very first thing it does is event.prevent default, because if we don't do that, it would reload the page, because it would submit the form, and the form currently would submit to the same page. Now, let's say, for example, you are submitting to some other endpoint, then it would actually navigate to that endpoint. Probably not what you want. So this way we're safe. First of all, it won't do anything if you just press enter. It's already filtered. Nothing will visually change, but at least in the background, we've prevented the default from happening. Cool. So that's basically what handle submit does. It prevents default. It gets the color input, so our input field. It gets the value from that, and it passes that value to filter color names. And we'll have a look at filter color names in a second. So the other one is add event listener input. This is handle input change. So this is the one that works when we're typing. So we've selected, hey, I want you to filter as you type. So then we have this event bound, and it will call this little guy. Now, we don't want every time a user presses the key to do the whole querying and filtering every time you type, because imagine somebody types really fast. Then it will do, every time it'll try and just rebuild the DOM, and the browser has to repaint. So what we're doing instead is we're doing a debounce. So what a debounce basically means in this case, well, what a debounce means, and this is a very simple debounce, is just wait a little bit. So basically what happens is it will call this function every time a user types, but this function is going to first of all see if there's a timeout already running. If there is one, it's going to clear it and it's going to start it again because the user's still typing. But as soon as the user stops typing, we're going to clear the previous timeout. We're going to start a new one for 300 milliseconds. And if the user hasn't typed in that span of 300 milliseconds, we will execute this.filter color names. So if you stop typing for 300 milliseconds, we'll do the filtering. But if any time between the last keystroke and your next keystroke, 300 milliseconds have not passed, we will just wait. We will just clear and start a new timer that'll wait for 300 milliseconds again. So if you keep typing, it'll just never start filtering essentially. So this is just a way, and this is especially useful if you are hitting backend APIs, because first of all, that can cost you money. And secondly, that can cause a janky or slow experience for your users. Now, 300 milliseconds in this case feels really nice because it doesn't feel too all of a sudden, but it also doesn't wait too long. So for example, if I'm going to type in black, right, and I just type in BLA, you'll see that the time between when I stop typing and when it filters feels immediate enough, but it's not, yeah, it feels immediate enough. So it doesn't feel laggy. So, but you can see there's that little bit of wait. See, just that little bit of wait before it goes. And that's that 300 millisecond wait there that it's waiting. So, filter color names. This is where we get to the thing that I was originally wanting to make a video about, and that is the filter function of arrays. So we have this sorted unique color names array, and whenever we call filter color names, we're passing in our query. Our query in this case is whatever's been typed into the input. So we call this, of course, for handle submit, and we call this in handle input change as well. And how the filter function works is that as a callback, and our callback is this little part in here, and what this callback function must do is it must return true or false. And what then happens is on the other side, so over here in color names, in this variable, we are creating a new array. So again, we're not messing with our sorted unique color names array. We're not changing it at all. We're creating a new array. And what's happening is if our callback function returns true, that value, so that color, is added to color names. If our function returns false, it's not added to color names. So this little condition in here needs to determine whether we actually are interested in this value. So for this, what we're saying is the current color that we're going through, does it include the string that's been typed into the input box? So let's say, for example, our color is Rebecca purple. So let's say Rebecca purple. So, and let's say the user has typed REB, right? So we're going to say, is REB exactly the letters REB in that order in Rebecca purple? And yes, it is. So we want to then add Rebecca purple into our color names. But let's say our color is red. Close, but it doesn't match because D and B not the same letter. So red will not be included in color names, and so on and so forth. And that is how we're filtering. It's as simple as that. That's how we're filtering. We're going through the array, and every time we're saying for each color, does it contain this exact string, yes or no? If it does, return it. If it doesn't, throw it out. And then right at the end, we're just calling list color names, which is the one we looked at earlier. And we're passing in all of the colors that has matched our filter function. So it could be 1, it could be nothing, it could be all 148, or it could be 100 of them. So I can show you the exact thing here now. So let me save there. So again, REB, you can see REB from Rebecca Purple, but then also Firebrick has REB here in the middle. But now as soon as I add another E, Firebrick falls away and the only one we're left with is Rebecca Purple. And of course, now if I add an X, we have no more results. And we can see that showing 0 of 148 colors. So if we go back, we have 1 again. If we go another one back, we have 2. If we go back, we have even more, and so on and so forth. But that's how simple, and that is how powerful this little filter function is, that you can do this full filtering with. This is 3 lines of code, but I mean, this could easily be 1 line of code. It's just prettier. That's making it look prettier, right? But it's 1 line of code that's doing the filtering. So it's incredibly powerful. And that is pretty much all the JavaScript that's handling all of this. But there is something that I might have forgotten. No. That is everything. So that's everything we wanted to look at from a JavaScript perspective. So, of course, as I mentioned, click there, 2 seconds later, changes back. And if we look at my clipboard, antique white is indeed there. Now, let's look at some of the CSS. And let's start by looking at this, right? So where am I using that? So I'm actually using that to set the background color. If we inspect this little guy here, you'll see that that's the LI, right? And we're setting that to antique white, and the next one to aqua, and the next one to aquamarine. And if we look over here, we can see the background color is set to color name. And so as we switch between, you can see how this stays in sync, right? Alice blue, Antigua, aqua, aquamarine, it just updates. So that's how I'm setting the background color for each of these elements, is through referencing the color name custom property that I'm setting for each individual list item. So if we look at the CSS itself here, then we can find it down here, and here it is. And that's how it works. That's all the magic. This is just the font. So here's our background color. There's nothing really special over here, just some margins, some min height. We're setting the color of our link, our H1, Here we're setting a font size clamp. So basically what this says is smallest, largest, and preferred, but that also creates like our increment. So as we reduce our, as we resize our window, you can see how our font reacts, and there it gets smaller there right at the end, where it starts going down, and there it increases. And we're clamping it so it doesn't ever get too big or too small. The other thing that you might notice is the way it's wrapping. It's wrapping quite early, and it's wrapping very specifically down to just that 4-3, which feels very nice. And that is because I'm using text wrap balance. Then we just have our field set, which is just here. There's nothing super interesting there. Also here, just some flex stuff, some more flex stuff, submit button. Here's where things starts getting interesting, but I'm going to focus on this specifically when we look at these items. So you will notice that we have our Alice blue, and then we have this border, and we have another one over here, and we have a border around our button. We have the text color of our actual text there, and we have this outline when we're hovering over it. Also, if we focus it with the keyboard, we get the same thing. And the way I'm creating those colors, because you can see they're all related to this, like this is aqua, all of this. This is all aquamarine. And the way that I'm doing this is using relative colors. So basically how that works is if we go down, let's see. So we have our, let's see, color names. Okay, that's our list. So here's our list item. Right, so here we have our background color, which is our background color over here. And then our border, we're using our relative color. So we're saying, okay, we're using this. So our color name, so literally let's say Alice Blue, we're using that as our from. So this is our base. Now what the browser does is it takes that color and it says, okay, what are the values, and specifically in this case, what are the HSL values for this color, for this Alice Blue color? So if we take that blue and we destructure, convert it into HSL, what would the values for H, so U, S, saturation, and then lightness be? And then that is what initially it sets HSL to. So you can see here, I'm just saying H, CSS, but then here I'm saying 25%, because what I'm telling the browser is, cool, we're going to use the color name as our base. And now we're going to create a relative color based on that. But I want to keep the hue the same. I want to keep the saturation the same as our reference color. But then I want to set the lightness, so the lightness value, to 25%. Now, this isn't 25% of whatever the lightness is currently. This just sets the lightness to 25%. I actually made a little, a very, very simple demo here that I'll show you real quick. Relative color. Let me open that up. So if we have a look in here, then I'm using, so I have origin and target. And what I'm doing is on origin, I'm using our origin, which is teal. And on target, I'm creating that relative color. Now, you will see here that it's set to 35%, which is lighter than this. But actually, if we go and we go down to 25, you'll see that match. So actually, and if we do this, L, you see that they match. Because the value of L, if you take teal and you spread it into HSL, the value of our lightness is 25%. So it's not taking whatever the lightness is and adding 25% to it or adding 75% to it. It's literally changing the lightness to that. So just that's important nuance to be aware of. So that's how that works. So we're doing that for the border block end. And then our outline, again, it's exactly the same. And same thing here with our copy color name, so our border, so that's our button. And then here's our focus visible and hover, so here's our outline. We're making it even darker, so we're setting our lightness to just 10%. So that is basically how I'm calculating these different colors based on the same base color by using this relative color syntax. So you can do this with RGB. You can even use the more newer stuff, of course, like OKLab and all of those guys. So you can do that in the same way by using this from color. And this does not have to be a custom property, by the way. It can also be one of the named colors, which it is actually in this case. I just reference it via a custom property. Or you can use a hex color or whatever the case may be. Like I said, what the browser does is it takes that, it spreads it into your target color space, and then you can mess with it. You can change the hue, you can change the, well, for HSL, you can change the hue, the saturation, and the lightness, or you can only change one of them. So, or two of them, or whatever the case may be. So that is how I then calculate all these different ones. And the really nice thing is, this looks great and worked great in Firefox. It also works great in Safari. Of course, I'm on the latest version of each of these browsers, right? Not beta or anything, the latest version. So be aware of that. So check your browser compatibility tables on MDN, or check can I use before you use this in your production code. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the CSS that was really interesting. Not really. Setting the background to it, that's just normal HSL. The rest is just using logical properties, padding block, padding inline, but I'll make a separate video about that, why I'm doing that and why it's a game changer. The rest is pretty straightforward, but again, I'll post all of this and you can go have a peek at all of it. And if there's anything that you're like, what the heck is going on here? Feel free to ask me in the comments, or I don't know, open an issue, tag me on social media, you know, send me an email. My email is here on YouTube. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Okay, so I think that is a pretty detailed look at how this thing is built. So you've already seen how it works for the most part. So if we have filter as you type, then, you know, as you type, of course, things are there. You can tab around. And as you do that, when you press enter, or if you click, it copies whatever color there is to your clipboard, and you can then, you know, use it wherever else you want to use it. And if you choose to go this route, you first have to type a word and then either tab to and press enter to filter, or of course you can also use your mouse to do that. So as a final end to this whole thing, let's turn on VoiceOver, and I'll show you what happens when you use this with VoiceOver. As mentioned, I'm going to use it with Chrome as I'm getting seemingly the best performance, the best results with Chrome and VoiceOver. But importantly, never test with just one screen reader. If you have access to a Windows machine, NVDA with Chrome seems to also be, it used to be NVDA with Firefox on Windows, but these days it seems the most popular combo is NVDA with Chrome. There's also, the name escapes me now, Windows has its own built-in one, also like VoiceOver, but a lot of people use NVDA because it's open source and free. There's, of course, JAWS, which is also available. Some people use that one on Windows. And then I can't remember now the one. I think it's Dolphin, but I might be mistaken. No, it's not Dolphin. I'll have to think about it. There's one for Linux as well. Of course, there is one for Linux. And on Linux, it's probably still Firefox is probably still the most. But again, there's subtle nuances between browser. So like with browser support, there's subtle nuances when it comes to screen reader support. And there's actually a project kind of coming underway that Lola is trying to get going, and I'm trying to help her out and see if we can get this going, which is like browser compat data, but for assistive tech. I'm really excited about getting that going because that would be super if we have a similar kind of data set that we can refer to understand this whole space and how the support is in this space. So I'm going to stop yapping and let me open up VoiceOver and let's see what happens here.
How do you want to filter? Group. Type a color. Find your new favorites. Entering find your new favorite CSS named color. Filter on submit. Selected. Radio. Filter as I type. Type a color name. Edit text. Filter on submit. Type a color name. Edit text. Main. You are currently on a filter button. You are currently on a button. Alice. Contents Alice. B. Filter button. You are currently on a button.
As you can see, I'm getting, for some reason, that live region doesn't, sometimes it works beautifully, and other times it's kind of like,
Filter, but red, content selected, type a color name, edit text, L, A, C, filter, button, U black, filter on, filter as I, black, showing 148 of 148 colors, B, A, showing to black. You are currently showing 23 of 148 colors. XK showing one black. You are copy black to your clipboard. Button. Group. List one item. Black copied. You are copy black to your clipboard. Black. Content selected. Type.
So as you could hear there, as I selected it, updated. So also when I move focus to this button, it reads the entire string, right?
Copy black to your clipboard. Button. Group. List.
And then when I interact with it.
Black copied. And then copy black to your clipboard.
So that's when it changed back, right? So
black.
Let's go back
Content
here.
Select black. D. Showing red. You are D. Showing 34 of 148 color. D. Showing 6 of 148 color. Copy darker to your clipboard. Copy and inner to your clipboard. Copy medium violet to your clipboard. Button. Group.
So the reason why it's reading this out weirdly is because the CSS color names, of course, is more than one word in most cases, like dark red, Indian red, medium violet red, actually 3 words, but it doesn't have spaces in between them. So the screen reader is trying to read this as one word, which is why it's sounding weird.
Copy orange, copy Polivia, copy red to your clipboard, but red copied. You are copy red to your clipboard. Copy Polivia, copied red, red, showing 148 of 148 colors. Filter on submit. Type a color D. Filter button, showing 6 of 148 colors.
Cool.
VoiceOver off.
So there at the end it started playing nicely. So you can see this is I would say accessible. If there's anything that I can do to improve this, I would love to know. And I would love to know also why VoiceOver is being funky. Maybe VoiceOver is just being funky. I would love to test this with NVDA as well, but I don't have access to Windows Machine at the moment. As soon as I do, I will definitely test it out with NVDA as well. I'd actually love to get set up where I have access to a Linux machine and Windows and all of these things. For now, I do what I can. So this is keyboard accessible. You can use it with your mouse. There's some instances where, like for example here, where you can see the color contrast isn't super great. There's some new things coming down the pipeline in browsers that's going to allow us to solve these kinds of problems as well when you have like this unpredictable list of colors. I think 95% of cases, maybe even a little more, in this instance, I've been able to nail down by using this relative color syntax, but there are instances where definitely it could be better. But yeah, this was really interesting. I got totally nerd sniped, but I think this is pretty cool. I'll stick this in a repo. I'll also make this live on the internet so other people can play around with this. Copy some stuff to your clipboard and use the colors. I don't know, just check out the code, play around with the code. This was a lot, over an hour. Again, this was supposed to be a quick video. Turned out not to be, but it was fun. It was interesting. I hope you found it fun and interesting. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you like this, please give it the old thumbs up. If you want more content like this, please subscribe. Really appreciate that a lot. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments or wherever else you can find me on the internet. And until the next one, make the internet a little bit more fun in your corner of the internet. Be kind and make the web accessible. Thanks, folks. Peace.